Hello, everybody. This is Craig Arenti from Palisade Compliance, and welcome to episode number 2 of our brand new podcast. Today, I'm excited that we're here with Ward Classen, distinguished author in the era of IT and software licensing. So, Ward, thank you very much for joining us today. I just want to give folks a little bit of your background so they know about you and what you're doing these days. So, Ward currently serves as general counsel at Sparta Systems, a Honeywell company, and is best known as the author of The Practical Guide for Software Licensing and Cloud Computing, now in its 8th edition and widely recognized as the definitive treatise on the subject. It's published by the American Bar Association, and Ward's work has shaped how practitioners and courts alike understand software licensing. So, Ward, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. I'm very excited to be here.
So, when we say that you've shaped how practitioners and courts understand software licensing, should we be happy with your work or should we be mad at you? How complex it's become.
Well, I think that unfortunately, over time, when I first started out almost 40 years ago, it was a relatively simplistic. And, if you all remember the days of the mainframe computers and people like IBM and EDS simply rented time out. We've then moved on to the PC, the mid-sized computer, and now we're kind of full swing back to cloud computing, which in another way is very similar to the mainframe computers of the 1980s and early 90s.
That is interesting, and I've been sort of in this space since the mid '90s. So you've got me. You're a little longer than I am, but not much, just a few years. But when I think about sort of when I was growing up, I probably wasn't thinking I was going to be into software asset management and compliance. So how did you get into this space? Like, what made you start writing and thinking and talking about software licensing?
Well, it was almost by mistake. I worked for an in-house for a corporation that really did manufacture telecommunications equipment, and then went in-house shortly thereafter when I moved back to Baltimore to get married with a small software company that did telecommunications. And so probably when I joined, my knowledge of software licensing wasn't so strong, but then the next 23 years with Computer Sciences Corporation, it grew. And I found it very interesting. I was very lucky to have some great mentors like Don Cohn, Ray Nimmer down at the University of Houston. Because when I went to my first bar meeting to talk about software license, very interesting. There were about 6 of us in the room, and that was probably about 1990. And obviously, since that time, the software world's exploded with software included in everything, from cars to cell phones to everything else in our life.
Yeah, it's amazing. I just did an update on my car and I never thought I would do that. And I had to accept the terms and conditions before I got the new functionality and I was like, wow, that really is part of everything, right? And I have no choice. I can't say no, right? Unless I
Well,
don't want the new bells and whistles.
that was like me. I couldn't get my TV to work with the cable, and what it was I hadn't downloaded the most recent upgrade to my computer. I mean, sorry, to my TV, which then allowed me to access Netflix. It was sort of crazy. You never would have thought of this in the old days because when I grew up, you had 3 channels and you turned your TV on and off. But now, obviously, everything is interlinked and connected.
Yeah, I mean, my son, he's 17, doesn't even watch TV, right? Everything's on the phone or on the screen or the tablet or the whatever. And I would be shocked to see him watch television these days. Just it's all on YouTube. So you mentioned the sort of circle of life and how software and licensing sort of is come back maybe to some place where it was years ago. One of the things that I've noticed is the complexity of these agreements, and in one respect, they might look smaller when I look at, our my world is Oracle. So when I look at
Right.
an Oracle contract these days, it might be fewer pages because there's all these URLs embedded in it where there wasn't before. But we had a client who was questioning why we were getting so detailed about the licensing. And he's like, this is not that complex. So I started printing out the URLs and we got to about 250 pages and I just stopped. This is for 3 or 4 products. And I literally mailed it to him and said, this is this is your contract with Oracle. And by the way, 95% of this could change at any time because it's in a URL.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I think that's a new trend, right? Because in the old days, you had a contract with your vendor and, it was on paper within the four corners, but then they needed to update it. They needed to get your approval for an amendment. We at work, we find oftentimes many of the clients never come back to us when we mail them something, paper, email them. And so, yes, the more sophisticated, bigger vendors have gone to URLs that are linked in the contract, and it says, we can change these terms at any time, sometimes with notice, sometimes without you. So it becomes a much trickier proposition than it was years ago. But remember, years ago, the value was supposedly all in the hardware, and the
Mhm.
software was sort of an after thought. But now laptops that once cost thousands of dollars, you can go to Best Buy and get one for 300. And meanwhile, the software that was relatively cheap is now hundreds of dollars for an annual license.
So how much, if you're a software negotiator, you're working for a firm, whether it's a law firm or you're in-house or, you're in procurement, how much time and effort should you spend clicking through those URLs? And how much will vendors typically make changes to what's in there?
Well, I think it all depends, right? It depends on your market power, right? So, in my practice, many of the larger customers say we don't accept URLs, print it out and attach it to the back as an exhibit, right? Which we're glad to do, but what that does, it does hamstring you a little bit. That means if you need to update those terms, you need to go back to the client and get a written amendment. Now, if you're a smaller customer, below a certain dollar amount, most vendors have a dollar cutoff. They simply say, we're not going to negotiate that point. You have to accept it as in. In fact, with more and more vendors going to a click-through license is where
Mhm.
you simply open up the software and there's an I accept. You have really no leverage, right? But I would say the bigger clients, have some leverage, but for clients that are small, it's just probably not going to work out. And I've actually seen one vendor that says, this is the price. If you want to negotiate your contract, the price is X plus 10%.
Right. That's funny because I remember when I worked at Oracle and I was running their contracts department, that was one of my ideas. I was like, we've got all these options. We were trying to get customers on standard paper. So one of the suggestions I had was, well, have two prices, right? Start charging to negotiate. And that didn't really go anywhere. That was sort of one of my ideas that was shot down pretty quickly.
Well, I think that's a great idea, right? Because look, I mean, everybody wants to have one template so that you know that across thousands of your customers, everybody has this governing law or this limitation of liability. But once you start having thousands of contracts and each one are different, it's really hard in my mind to get any synergies, right? And if you have to negotiate every contract, that's an additional cost because, as you know, when you're negotiating with large vendors like Oracle, sometimes the negotiations can take months.
Or years,
Yeah,
or years. So, do you have the one issue where you've got all these URLs and I think again, I'm just going to focus on Oracle because, they're not any different or better or worse.
right.
That's my world. So you might have 10 URLs in a standard license agreement now where you had maybe one a few years ago or none many years ago. What
Right.
about at least those URLs are in the contract, right? You have an opportunity, you sign something, you get a document, whether, it's probably electronic now and you're on DocuSign, you're negotiating on Zoom or whatever, but at least you know that that URL is out there. But there's this whole other world that I see technology vendors, this whole other practice of just, and I say MSU, they make stuff up. They just put policies online that are not part of the contract. They just said, if you use our software in the cloud, this is how you license it. But it's not referenced in the contract. It's just completely. So that's what we're seeing on the Oracle side is we're seeing a lot more just stuff being made up by vendors and that vendor and posted. So how much does that impact the agreement you have with the vendor when they have policies that say right on them it's not part of the contract, but then they constantly reference them?
Yeah, I think that again, it comes back to market power, right? I mean, to me, if I was representing the licensee or the user subscriber, I would push back and say, hey, we have an integration clause, meaning the entire agreement clause.
Mhm.
We agreed to this, right? And therefore, this isn't part of the contract. Of course, nobody wants to end up in litigation, especially when you're litigating a very large company, because it's really a lose-lose, right? I mean, if you've got concerns, and there's certain vendors have reputations in the industry for certain things, maybe you want to negotiate a clause right up front that says, hey, if they're posting new terms on the internet through a URL, and therefore, it materially impacts the benefit you were receiving, you have the right to terminate the agreement for convenience, or some other out, so you're not automatically bound by sort of one-sided terms that impact the benefit of the bargain.
Yeah, there's such an imbalance of power, I think, between technology vendors and their users or their consumers or their customers. Because when I think about some of the clauses in these agreements around termination for convenience or termination for cause, and we're pretty active in the audit defense space. So when we see a vendor, and this goes beyond Oracle, so a vendor is auditing their customer, and it sort of gets a little threatening, right? So one avenue is the vendor could turn off your licenses, right? So cancel the agreement, but that could put the company out of business because now they can't access that software, which is to run the business. Now, if the customer feels they're being treated unfairly, they could also terminate the agreement and not have access to the licenses, which puts them out of business. So it's this real, I mean, when you are starting to work with a technology vendor, you have to be really careful because I think the balance of power completely shifts to the vendor unless you can easily move off of their product or service. Like they will do everything they can, or they'll take every liberty they can if they feel you can't move off of their product. It's different than you buy a car or something. Like the behavior I see in technology and from big vendors is just very not customer friendly.
I totally agree with you. The best relationship you're ever going to have with the vendor is at the time of contract signature. And then, if it's a mission critical system, the vendor has all the leverage, and they also have all the leverage in these audits, right? And then, to me, if you're going to be audited, you really need to retain a third party consultant like Palisades, right, to help you, because these audits can really hurt you, right? I mean, many times they're fishing expeditions. This is my view as somebody that's been audited, right? Because I think it's the old adage, it's easier to audit a customer you have and look for revenue opportunities than to go out and find a new customer, right? Because oftentimes there are audit provisions. And I think that this is something that's overlooked in negotiating contracts, but one that deserves a lot of attention, right? So, for example, what is the extent of the audit? Can they audit everything, or is it a very limited time period? Is it a very limited application? And then, two, what is the audit? Can you do the self audit? Sophisticated customers just want to do a self audit, or is there a self audit where there's going to be a report that has to be provided, executed by a officer of the company, or is it really at the other end of the spectrum where there's a third party that's going to come in? And then, of course, there are all kinds of limitations. How long can they audit for? Where is the audit during normal work hours? Can they put bots into your system to sort of go wild and find alleged wrongdoing, right? And then finally, at the back end is, now there's been a, exceeding your license rights for whatever reason, and they can come about for many common reasons. There can be, acquisitions. And so several companies have merged, and they've lost track in the sourcing department of how many licenses you have, or you had a license per CPU and now it's on nodules and things like that. And so the measurement has changed. And so then, the vendor really has a lot of leverage because, through just, an oversight, innocent oversight, you're have exceeded the scope of your license. And so now, do you pay the negotiated license fee for the software in the contract? Do you pay for the list price? or as I won't mention them, but you know them well, come and they want a premium because they're threatening you with litigation, right? And so these audits are very, very important. And as I said, if you haven't been through an audit before, it's well worth retaining an experienced consultant that can help you through this and understand how it all works and what the likely outcome will be.
One of the things I like about what you're writing is for both sides. Now, so we're in the audit defense business, so we help customers sort of on the receiving end, and but it's really important for software and SaaS providers I think, for them to have audit provisions in their contracts because they have to protect their IP. People, you just don't want people taking it and downloading it and using it. So there must be some repercussions or some ability for a vendor to just check, right? Because that is their whole existence is this IP that they are handing to you to use in your environment.
Look, totally agree. There are two sides to every story. One of the things about my book, it's a practical guide, and I give practical guidance both from the vendor and from the licensee subscriber perspective. And yes, I've been involved on both sides where we've been audited, but also where we have been auditing some of our customers. And usually, we don't audit just at the drop of a hat. There's something like somebody calling to the help desk and they don't have a license. And we're wondering, why are you calling the help desk if you don't have a license? And those are sort of things that trigger it from our perspective. But yes, I mean, look, it is your intellectual property, your crown jewels. This is how you pay your employees, right? You pay your shareholders if you're public. So the vendor does need to have the right to audit. But in my mind, it's got to be a win-win situation, because if you're constantly, as the vendor, threatening to club your clients to death, you get a bad reputation. And there was a company headquartered up in Long Island that was quite well known in the day. And many of our customers put in there that if we were acquired by this company, they could terminate for convenience because they had a terrible reputation. And I agree, right? I mean, you want to treat your customers right, but it's Ronald Reagan said, you want to trust but verify.
I think I know who you're talking about. We had a few of them work at Oracle. They sort of went from that other company to Oracle. So, um, what, if any, responsibility is there anything in the law? Is there anything that requires a vendor to make it easier or easy or even doable for their customers to stay in compliance? Or is it like buyer beware? You're buying the software, it's 100% on you. Can the vendor lay traps? Can they open up the software? Can they allow them to use some stuff and then hit them later? Like, are there any restrictions legally for software providers in sort of um, in the compliance world, or is it just they can do whatever they want?
Well, I think that one, many vendors will put something in the agreement that said, we'd like you to self-certify on an annual basis, or if we do reach out to you, we want you to self-certify. I think customers are hesitant and usually ask vendors to rep and warrant that there are no Trojan horses, uh, trapdoors, things like that. Although, honestly, with on prem software, sometimes they have phone home
Mhm.
applications, which will basically report out to the vendor. But obviously, if it's SaaS, the application is sitting on the vendor's hardware servers, and they can access it if they want. But I think that you know people are very hesitant as a vendor to interfere with the customer software SaaS because they don't want to be sued if something were to go wrong. And at the same time, the customers should certainly put reps and warranties, or have the vendor rep and warranty that they don't have any backdoors, trapdoors, things like that to protect the customer's interests.
It's almost, when I think about audits, it's, and again, this is beyond Oracle. The approach I see vendors take is you are guilty until you prove you're innocent. So you have to prove you're in compliance, which is difficult, right? It's a really high bar. Like, how do I prove I'm not hiding anything from you? How do I, like, I've had vendors say, well, we just can't be sure, so you have to buy it. So it's a really high bar, and it's a high pressure that they put on their uh, So if you just have a regular audit provision, like what is the proof? Is it you have to prove I'm out of compliance, or do I need to prove I'm in compliance? Or is it a commercial sort of relationship and you'll work it out?
Well, I'd like to think that it's a commercial relationship and you'll work it out. But look, it's very hard, especially if you've been a customer or client of the vendor for many years, because it always surprised me and my employers in the past, they'd get a letter from the vendor auditing, and we can't find the contract because the contract was signed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, complete turnover in the sourcing department. And everybody's like, well, we don't know what happened to those, right?
Oh,
Or, we acquired a company, we merged the systems, and we don't have the contract from the old vendor, or sorry, old customer we acquired. And then, many times people don't track it. They had 50 licenses, we had 100, and somehow now we're using 200, and people lost track. So it's a negotiation, but I think unfortunately vendors often put in language that says, the prevailing party, if there's a litigation, and the prevailing party will have its legal fees paid by the losing party. Now in America, in the United States, as you know, each party pays its own legal fees unless there's some reallocation. And then for the customer, who's usually smaller than the vendor, there's a huge risk because you may have to pay this exalted license fee that was much higher than the negotiated fee. And oh, by the way, now you're going to have to pay the winner's legal fees and your own legal fees, which can be substantial because in litigating some of this in the past, it's very detailed. You're going back years and years and years. It's not like you signed the software license or SaaS agreement this summer and we're going to litigate next summer. Usually it's many years later, and many of the people who negotiated it, worked on it, have all left the company, and now you're starting from scratch, and you may not have the insights you need to prove your point.
that definitely hits home. I started this company in 2011, so it's been about 14 years now. And the first few clients, and I'm a contracts guy, so
Yep.
I fully expected when I got a customer and I say, "Hey, send me your Oracle contracts," they would be able to hit a button in their contract management system, send me an email, but they don't have them. They still don't have them, right? And they're in a tough spot because many and our customers, a little self-selected, so they come to us when they have a problem. They don't
Right.
have, they're not happy Oracle customers, let's say, so they've got an issue. One of the issue is the license entitlement. What do we have? And they're in a tough spot because sometimes they don't have the contract, and almost the last thing you want to do is go back to the vendor and say, I don't have my contract. Can you help me? Because that is, you were talking about why vendors audit. That is one of the red flags. When you go to a vendor and show weakness or you don't know,
Right.
they will jump on that almost universally.
Look, I totally agree with that, right? You're basically saying, I have no idea what my license rights are. Would you please tell me?
Right.
And I think that is very, very problematic. And I think, the other thing that my experience has been with large vendors like Oracle is oftentimes they come to you and say, okay, you're out of compliance. Now, here's how we'll resolve this if you don't want to litigate. You're going to buy even more of my software and you're going to extend your license terms. And so, it's like all of a sudden somebody's got their hands around your throat, and you really don't have a choice. Well, we can litigate this, or I guess we could buy more software. And when you buy more software, they're just getting farther and farther into your systems, and it's going to become harder and harder eventually to break away from them if you want to leave them.
Yeah, and when it comes to the cost of litigation, we've had, hundreds of customers over the years, like 800 clients. We've only had one that actually went to litigation, and they sued Oracle. They went and they were under audit, and that was Mars. They went into federal court, asked for, and this is all public,
Yeah.
asked for an injunction against Oracle breach. Oracle said Mars was breaching, and we're going to terminate all your licenses. They filed that on a Thursday. I think it was delivered on Friday. The case was withdrawn on Monday, and Mars is still a client of ours, right? That's all I could say. So, but that's one out of 800. We've had so many who, when first time we get on the phone, they're like, we're going to sue, we're going to sue. And we're the ones who are like, no, you're not. You're not going to sue Oracle over this $300,000 issue because the
Right.
cost is going to be astronomical. So how do customers, I feel like that's a lot of the problem is like there is no case law on some of this. Like, and we can get into particulars like licensing Oracle in the cloud, Java licensing, VMware licensing, because everybody settles. So it's sort of to your point, they just give the vendor more money and everybody walks away. The vendor walks away happy, but the customers walk away unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation. Now, Mars is a wonderful company and it's multi-billion dollar company itself. So I think it has the resources to litigate. But you're exactly right, that, in litigating some of this myself, you can spend $2 million at a drop of a hat, right? And so to me, there's two part of this. You can't be emotional. So if you think the vendor is, getting the best of you, treating you unfairly, right? Not being on the up and up, unfortunately, you have to put that aside and be practical and a pragmatic person and say, look, yeah,
Right.
we can sue them and I'll feel better tilting at windmills, but we need a practical solution because we have a $300,000 problem and, spending 2 million to win isn't going to help me because even if I win, now I'm out 1.7 million more than I wanted to
Right.
spend. So,
Right.
it comes back to something I said earlier. Remember, you're never going to have a better relationship with the vendor or the customer than at the time of contract signature. So when you're thinking about all the great things going in and make sure there's the functionality, also think about how to get out, right? Don't sign a 10-year contract. Maybe you sign a 3-year contract and they'll have a couple 2-year renewals. And maybe it's going to cost you a little more than a 10-year contract, but it gives you a lot more flexibility.
Mhm.
Also, make sure they're going to assist you in transition services when you're leaving. They're going to return your data within 30 days in a proper format, right? I know these are all kind of the minutia things when you're getting ready to go into a big contract, but think about your exit strategy because if you don't, again, that's another thing the vendor can hold over and, oh, we're going to charge you this much to, port your data out. We're going to charge you this much for transition services. And when you're a customer, yeah, they may give you a 20% discount on services, but when you're leaving, they may be charging you a premium. So,
Yeah.
if you can get a rate card, great. But otherwise, plan for your exit because if you don't, it's going to be a lot harder to leave than you ever thought it was.
I love the way you said that, and we spend a lot of time with our customers on the exit, right? We're literally signing 3 and 4 or they're signing 3 and 4-year deals, and we keep talking about, well, what happens in 3 and 4 years? Let's make sure that's in
Right.
here because if we don't put it in here, here's what's going to happen. And so, it's difficult because obviously the vendors don't want to talk about that. They don't want to put that in the
Right.
agreement. And the customer's often excited about this brand new thing they're buying. So, if it's not an audit, right, they have some new project or new functionality or some new tool. So talking about the end, like it's like getting married and talking about a prenup or your divorce decree, right? When you sign your marriage certificate. So those two things normally don't go together, but I do think they go together in software and SaaS licensing.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you often see very common in SaaS, and sometimes it's over, is the evergreen renewals. That if you don't notify us 90 days prior to the third anniversary, you're now re up for another 2 years, right? And unfortunately, I think this is one of the issues that losing contracts, things falling through the cracks. It sounds okay because we'll, of course, remember to give notice 90 days before, but there's turnover. People don't have a checklist or a tickler file. And the next thing you know, boom, you just signed up for 2 more years, right? And
Right.
so I think that look at those clauses up front and make sure that if you want to accept them, you have a way to mitigate the risk to you because I can't tell you how many times people have come and said the notice period has passed. What can we do?
Right.
And
Right.
it's the rare customer to let you out, or they'll let you. I mean, the rare vendor that will let you out, or they want a termination fee, right?
Right.
And so think about those sort of exit clauses as well.
So if we could shift gears for a second. So
Yeah.
we've been talking about sort of the minutia. Maybe we go to some big picture stuff, some new stuff. And we could talk about this topic forever, I guess. But AI. So if we put software licensing aside and just focus on contract negotiations in general, has AI impacted your practice? Are you using AI? Is your firm using AI? Are you, looking at contracts differently, quicker? Is this negotiation changing? Again, it could be for a lease of a building or a car or um, how is AI impacting you today? And where do you think it's going to be in a couple of years?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a very, very interesting question. I mean, so I think there are two aspects of that. Okay. One is, are we using AI in our practice today? Right now, I think we're crawling before we walk, before we run. Okay. I mean, the newspapers and news are filled with these people that are writing briefs, and everything's an hallucination. But for us, we're testing it out, right? Okay, we want to make sure it works. We're trying to build models. um, my belief is in 10 years, yeah, that this will be a very sophisticated, well-developed model, and then a lot of uh, commercial contracting review can be done by AI. Okay. The other issue that we see is much more common is that as we try to build our AI models, more and more customers are putting language into our agreements, or want to put language into our agreements, saying we won't use AI, right? And what they're
Mhm.
concerned is that even though we may de-identify or anonymize their data as we try to build our models, that somehow their confidential information will be disclosed. And so what you see is they are forbidding us to use any sort of AI, or they want, it's like in the old days when they wanted us to disclose if there was open source software in the applications, they want us to disclose if there's AI and then seek to prohibit it. But I think if you remember with open source software, people were very, very concerned about open source software because of the viral nature, and suddenly you'd have to disclose your
Mhm.
source code. That that has passed. I think almost all software, all applications are incorporating open source software to some degree. My suspicion is 10 years from now, this will be much more developed, and then AI will be part of most software applications and SaaS applications.
Because we're on both sides, right? We sell our stuff to our clients, and then we're
Yep.
helping customers buy stuff from vendors. So we haven't seen our customers or vendors really integrate clauses around AI yet. So I'm expecting that. But personally, I am car shopping. So my son just got his license. So we're looking at different cars, and we went to a few dealerships, and we're looking for cars, and we got a couple of quotes, but of course they won't let you take the quote. They won't give you a written
Right.
quote. So, but they said it's against policy, right? I was like, all right, but you can take a picture of the quote and walk out with that. I was like, okay. So we took a picture of the quote, and then I uploaded it to AI, and I said, hey, can you tell me about this quote? Am I getting a good price? What's in here? What's not in here? What should I? And wow, it gave me some detailed, like they're asking for this. Here's the average price in your area. And I was just amazed at the benefit that I received just from, and it took 30 seconds, right? It just having and someone told me to do it, someone who was car shopping before me, like I would never have thought of this. It's like, you should do that. You're gonna see. And I was like, wow, you just saved me a few $100s and like hours of sort of haggling, and we still haven't bought the car. But I would imagine that is going to be in our space soon, right? And if it's not already, there's firms out there that you can send them your agreements, and they'll put them through their AI models and come back with lists of terms and conditions and pricing and things like that, that you should be asking for. So I think buyers are going to get much more sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept. For the last 5 or 10 years, maybe even, there have been vendors out there that will basically create a model, not an AI model, but basically run a sort of compare and contrast contracts through your playbook, right? And a
Mhm.
playbook is basically a list of terms, and then what's acceptable to you, what's your fallback, and then maybe what's your bottom line. And so, for example, if you get a contract that says it's governed by Massachusetts law and you want it to be governed by New Jersey law, it would simply point out that, hey, they want Massachusetts, you want New Jersey. Very simplistic, right? But I think AI is going to be able to take it to the next level, where they'll be able to rewrite the whole contract. They'll be able to blackline the whole contract. And then, I assume at some point there needs to be a little bit of human oversight. But of course, I'm of a different generation,
Yeah.
but I think, in 10, 15 years, right, you won't have as many people in sourcing or people like me in commercial contracting. Excuse me. It'll be mostly done by AI, and the models will be very, very sophisticated.
I mean, we started selling a new service at the beginning of this year, and we needed a new SOW template. and I went into AI and I put in prompts and it gave me a template and I refined it and it gave me a second, a third, and we did send it to someone to review. Is there anything we're missing? But it probably did 85% of the work, 90% of the work really well. And then we just had, like you said, someone else look at it who had been doing this for a while and sort of knew their stuff and, knew how we operated. But the cost of creating that template for me went down by 90%, just
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah. I mean, I think there's constantly being evolution, right? So when I got out of law school and went into practice, they actually typed the contracts. And then many of us started out with a ruler underlining and lining through, black lining or red lining. And of course, today, Microsoft Word does track changes, right? And
Right.
nobody actually red lines or black lines like they did in 1985. And I think what you'll see is it will be very sophisticated. It's going to save a significant amount of time, right? And hopefully drive efficiencies into quicker contracting. And that's something that vendors want, right? The quicker they can get to a contract, the quicker they get paid. And from the customer side, the quicker they get to a contract, the quicker they get the benefit of the application.
Yeah, so I also went to law school, right? So never practiced. And then I hired a couple of people from my law school at Oracle. And I remember asking them, I'm like, hey, listen, part of this job, you got to know how to copy and paste. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we know Word and Word Perfect at the time.
Yes.
I'm like, no, no, we cut with a scissor and we paste it and then we Xerox it and we fax it. Like that is how unsophisticated we were in 1996. But you're right. Now it's, this system tracking to this system and show me what the delta is. And I think, our clients and even the vendors, they've all adopted it because it saves them time as well, right? It's hard to sneak things past people now if they just, have their own little process checklist. Whereas in the past, you could literally get stuff past someone. It's 2 minutes to the fiscal year end. We just have to sign it, and then you're trying to figure out, well, what did I just sign? I think there's a lot less of that now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the law is going to continue to evolve. I think it's going to become more sophisticated. I mean, the contracts that I used to sign years ago were relatively short. And now, just did one yesterday. The limitation of liability was 2 pages, right? Caps, super caps, carve outs, unlimited liability, the indemnities, the cross between the indemnity and the limited liability. But in the old days, it was relatively short. And I think the other things you see in the old days when we talked about breach of confidentiality was that I took your confidential information, your business information, and misappropriated it. But today the bigger issue really isn't breach of confidentiality; it's data rights. Can we use your data? What's the remedy if there's a data breach, right? And so that has come to the forefront, and I think it'll continue to change, for as long as we're here negotiating contracts.
And the data rights and also um, data sovereignty. We're seeing that a lot. A
Right.
lot of our customers are really pushing that point with their vendors. This data needs to stay in this geography, whether it's in the EU or a particular country or the United States. But so now these cloud vendors, which I think for them it used to be we're going to have one big or two big data centers around the world. Now they've got data centers all over. They've got hundreds of data centers in every country. So that is one of the trends I'm seeing universally is data sovereignty is really important. What other trends are you seeing? What are people asking for that maybe it's cutting edge now, but in a few years everyone's going to be doing it?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that comes up quite a bit now is the WCAG standards, which is the ability of people that might be site impacted to visit websites, things like that. And so we see more and more very large national banks, vendors asking us to comply with the WCAG, WCAG standards, right? And of course, for us, the challenge is these standards are continually changing, right? It's like compliance with laws. Well, okay, we'll comply with the law today, but what happens tomorrow when the law changes? And the example that I was just talking about this morning was the EU Data Act, which is going into effect September 12th of this coming September. And that law allegedly allows customers to terminate convenience and port their data, right? And we were talking about, well, how would anybody have a contract if the customer could just simply say they want to port their data to a third party and terminate their contract for convenience? So that's something that people are looking at. But the bigger issue is the one you identified is data use rights. What can the vendor do to use your data, right? So I think everybody would agree the vendor can use the customer's data to provide the services. The vendor can too use the data to improve those services.
Mhm.
But the big point is, can the vendor use your data to create new products or for some other purpose, right? If it's de-identified or anonymized, because what's happening is people are realizing there's real value in people's data. And for example, we could aggregate the data from, I don't know, all the airlines and determine how often the engines need to be serviced. We could go back and sell that data to the airlines themselves, right? But of course, the airlines may feel that's our proprietary data. We don't want it out there. Or why are you profiting from our data, right? And so that's something that's always negotiated quite heavily.
It seems that's a blurry line in terms of when did you cross as if you were a provider, if I was a provider, when is this I'm improving the services that I'm offering you versus I'm developing something new, right? There's always that fuzziness. And now with AI agents and bots and things like that, these application vendors, pick one, they are using all that data, right? And they're creating these agents to help your sales teams or help your internal finance organizations. So, but it is an aggregate of all this data, right? So, at least in our little company, you've got almost like two camps. You've got the anti-AI folks and you've got the pro-AI folks. Let's just use it and figure it out. And then those are like, no, it's stealing. Everything is stealing somebody else's data. And it's almost like no one in the middle who's trying to say, let's try it here, or let's try it there. Is that are your clients or people more excited about AI or are they more worried about AI?
I mean, I think everybody's worried. They see the benefits, but I think they're worried, right? Okay, can the data be misused, right? And I think the classic example, I think it was from Samsung, where two guys were using AI to develop some source code. They used a public model, and unbeknownst to them, that when you used it, it also captured the data. The next, Samsung's proprietary source code was out in the internet, right? So people see the benefit, but they also want to make sure it's used in a controlled manner, right? And I think the customers want to benefit, right? So if we could write software in an afternoon instead of 3 months, that would be great. I would think it would lower costs to everybody. But, it's again, we really need to understand the power of AI before we roll it out completely. And I think you see, as I mentioned earlier, some of the challenges. I've read at least 3 or 4 cases now where people submitted briefs to a court where the citations were completely made up. And some of them were very big, reputable firms. And I don't understand that, because I would have thought somebody would have gone through and cross-checked these cases. You simply can go to Westlaw or Lexis or somebody like that, enter them in, and it'll do it in a snap. But somehow these people just trusted AI, and it's come back to haunt them.
I mean, you could even, I read those stories as well. You could even take that brief and put it in another AI model to fact check it. You would think even
Right.
that they could have done and that would have at least found the discrepancies. So is AI going to require more of us contract negotiators or is it going to require less of us contract negotiators?
Well, I think ultimately, unfortunately, be less of us. I may well be retired by that time. But in the meantime, though, I think it's going to require a heightened vigilance by all of our contract negotiators like you and me to make sure that we understand the implications of the AI related clauses that vendors or customers are inserting into our contracts, right? Some of our customers have a laundry list. They list 3 or 4 or 5 uh, AI programs they want to make sure we're not using. Some just have a blanket prohibition. And then honestly, some they haven't woken up to the issue yet. So they do not even address it in the contract. And we're not going to put it in there unless they raise it.
So if this was a baseball game for AI, what inning are we in? Was it still the top of the first or are we?
Oh, I think we may be in the second going into the third, but we're at the very beginning of our AI journey.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. Uh, Ward, I could talk to you forever about all of this. I really appreciate that. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an up and coming software contract negotiator, what would it be?
I would emphasize read the contracts carefully, even though you may have read an indemnity clause 100 times. Read each and every one as if it's your first. And then, second of all, have equanimity. Don't let the other side upset you. Let it roll off your back. I see a lot of people take things personally, right? But it's business, right? And you may be on the other side of me in the table, Craig, but I can certainly get along with everybody. And don't let your temper get the best of you, because I think that really derails contract negotiations.
Good life advice too, I think.
I agree with that too.
So, Ward, thank you very much for all of those who powered through to the end. Uh, Ward and the ABA is offering a discount on his new book, the eighth edition. So we will give details in the description of this podcast, and anyone who requests them, so you can all go get it. I highly recommend everyone read that book if you're in this industry. And again, what I like about it is it's fair. It's on both sides. What do software providers need to do? What do users and consumers of that? So we appreciate all the work that you've done and your contribution to this field. And thank you for your time today, Ward.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking to you.